3 of the potion tutorial series. In this one, we'll be creating the bubble system, so they'll rise up from the potion and they'll pop above the surface. Now, 86% of you aren't subscribed yet, so if you do enjoy the series, please leave a like, a comment, subscribe. It will help me out a lot. Enjoy. And the way to do that, quite easy. Let's select our object, and after the set position node, let's hit Shift A and find a distribute points in volume, and just connect this there. Hit Shift A, join geometry there, and connect this back up there. Right, now we don't have a volume yet, of course, because, well, even though we do have a volume, we need to turn this into a volume. Shift A, mesh to volume. There we go. And now we can distribute points in that volume. So hit Alt Z to see where these points are. There we go. And we can, for example, let's say, shrink this volume down a tiny bit. Shift A, transform geometry, like that. We can shrink this down so it doesn't come as close to the edge as it is now. So hold left click at the X value and drag down until all the values are selected. So not like that, but like this. And then just drag this down so everything scales a tiny bit. That's not scaled in Z direction though, that's not needed. Set this to 1. So there we go. Now let's crank the density up a little bit. So you can now see we're adding some cool points in our volume. All right. And so let's move our Z value up a tiny bit. Like that. Beautiful. So now we're adding points in our volume, and we can just change the seeds. For example, if we want different kinds of points distributed in our volume. Right. So how now do we turn this into actual bubbles, I suppose? Well, we can Shift A, find an instance on points here, and the instance is going to be a UV sphere, or let's make it a cube. There we go. And let's hit Shift A, subdivision surface here, and set this to 2, and Shift A, set shade smooth here as well. Right, so now for the scale, we can drag that out to a random value, set this to float, so they will be uniformly scaled, and connect that back up. Minimum value, let's say 0.2, maximum value 0.5, maybe less, 0.05 to 0.15. Yeah, maybe 0.2 as a maximum, something like that looks fine. Now I want these bubbles to move up in like a constant speed before they maybe pop, and we'll see. So how do we do that? Well, we can just set position of these points, but I'm going to do that in, let's say, a simulation zone, I think. So hit Shift A, simulation zone. We can connect this up here, this up there, disconnect this, and we can actually find Shift A as set position node here, and we can offset this every frame by, let's say, 0.1 meters. Is that too fast? That's way too fast. 0.005 maybe. Yeah, that's a lot more slow, I suppose. Now, I want points to spawn every second, maybe. Not every second, but it has to spawn frequently, which means we can Shift A and join geometry here, and we can drag our instances to a join geometry, which means it's now going to spawn every frame. Now, that may be a bit much, so we can really crank down our density of our mesh. So there's like 2 points spawning every second, or 1 maybe. You can see how quickly that really ramps up. So perhaps we crank this down by a lot as well. Like that. And we change the seeds to be hashtag frame. Right? Now we should see points spawning at frequent times, but at random positions. Right? Quite interesting. Maybe the density can be even lower, 0.02. And I'm going to set my scale to be 0.1 to 0.35. That way, they are just a bit larger when they do spawn. So let's see, maybe we now crank down the density too much. You can see it's playing around a bit with these values, but now you can see we're really spawning points. Quite cool, right? Yeah. There we go, and maybe we should change the seeds of our scale as well. Let's see. There we go. So now the frame, or the scaling is going to change every frame as well. Right, so now if we now go to our render view, we can see that we got points spawning in our potion. I want a random, or not a random, but a specific material there as well. So hit Shift A, set material at the points where you are behind your simulation. Drag it in there. and let's go to the material tab, plus new, and name this bubbles. Bubbles, I guess. Bubbles. And let's go to the shader editor, hit home, and let's create a nice bubble material. Why not? So for the bubble, I want this to be more transparent, of course, so we could drag the alpha down, or we can create a nice mix between two shaders. So let's delete this, Shift A, mix shader, connect that up here, and I want one shader to be, for example, glass BSDF, and I want one shader to be, for example, transparent BSDF. Alright, so you can already tell what is going on, and we can now use this mix shader, drag that out to, for example, a Fresnel node. Fresnel, and Shift A, color ramp here, and we can now Ctrl Shift click on that to see how it looks, right? So we can switch these materials in a nice way, right? Ctrl Shift click on that, and we need to switch these materials just like that, right? So let's play around a little bit more with how that looks. I suppose it's not completely the way I envisioned it, maybe like that. And we can just change these black and white values as well if you want more of a blend between the two materials, right? This shouldn't be completely white, something like that. And these values can be quite close together as well, I suppose. Let's see. Let's see. Maybe not like that though. Let's add a bit of transparent color there, and let's add a bit of a glass color as well. More purple maybe, like that. I think that looks magical. You agree? Yeah, I think that looks magical. So let's Ctrl B around our entire interface there, and let's hide our glass as well to see how that looks in, well, in a glass kind of view. Maybe this needs to be darker. Something like that. Maybe this can be more into the orange tint. Looks quite interesting. And that way we have bubbles moving up and up and up. Right? Quite cool. It gets shaped down by the curve of the glass even. Looks quite cool, right? Quite cool indeed. So, do we want these bubbles to pop is the question. And the question is, maybe we do. What we can do is an easy way to pop bubbles is if we just have them react to the glass, for example. Hit Alt Z. So let's say they move up and they go a bit slow maybe. What we can do is speed it up a little bit by making this 0.01, right? Let's see how quickly they go in that case. Hello, remove a 0. They're going to be moving up just like that. Just like that. And then when they hit the glass, they should pop. What I'm going to do is I want these bubbles to have a specific age before they pop. So to do that, let's drag everything to the left here. And this to the left there. And Shift A, store named attribute. And for each instance, we're going to store, set this to instance. We're going to store, drag this out to an attribute, named attribute, sorry. And name this age. Name this age as well. And hit Shift A, math, and set this to add and add 1. Now what this does is each frame we're storing an attribute called age. At frame 0, this is 0. The next frame, we're going to add 1 to that age, which means the age is 1. The frame after that is going to be 1 plus 1 is 2. Next frame, 2 plus 1 is 3. So it's going to be aging our particles or instances every frame by a value of 1, which gives them an age, right? Easy as that. So now we can use this age to, for example, delete bubbles. So hit Shift A, delete geometry, instance, and let's delete based on that age. So drag this out to a named attribute, name this age, and we want to Shift A, compare this age, so that if it is greater than, for example, a value of 15, it is going to delete our particle, our instance. The reason this is not working yet is because we stored this as a boolean, or we use this as a boolean. Let's use this as a float, like we actually store it, right? Smart. And now when it grows larger than 15 frames, it should delete the bubble, right? So let's set this a bit higher to maybe 50, so they actually pop out above the flask, above the liquid level, maybe 100. It's a bit too low, 78. Maybe. Yeah, that looks good. So then the geometry needs to be deleted, but just before that, and let's set this to 80, just before that happens, it needs to expand and grow bigger. So let's move all of this to the right. There we go. And let's hit Shift A, transform geometry, or scale instances maybe. Scale instances. There we go. And we want to scale this instance based on the age as well. Right, so Shift D, that named attribute, and let's drag that out to, let's say, we need our compare node, compare, and let's say we want to compare age. If this is bigger than 70, float greater than 70, we want our scale to be bigger. Right, and the easiest way to actually do this is that once in our simulation zone we hit that 75 frames, we are actually going to store an extra attribute that we call explode, I suppose, and we can store this to be well, Shift A value. We want this to be 0, right? It's going to start as 0, and then it's going to Shift A math. We add 0.1 every frame, maybe, like that. But it's only going to start counting once we hit 75 frames. So hit Shift A, switch, float. If the frame is 75 is not reached yet, we can just have a value of 0. And otherwise, we have 0 plus a value, right? And not 0, but explode plus a value, right? So we just delete this and duplicate this to explode. There we go, crank this in here, and there we go. So the false will set the explode value to 0, and then once our age hits 75, we should get explode plus 0.1, and then carrying on from there. So hopefully that works, and then we can, here, where we scale our instance, we can drag this out to a named attribute, and we can set this to float, we can set this to explode, Shift A math, and we want to add explode to a value scale of 1. All right, so that should theoretically work. Let's see. There are bubbles, and if it gets larger than 75, our explode value should be doing things. Does it? It does not. So let's drag this down to our spreadsheet editor and see what is going on. Are we using a float? Yes. Do we store this as an instance? Yes. Let's click on instance. We have an explode value that does not seem to grow, maybe. All right. We have 3 instances. Explode is there. It's bigger than 75. And our explode value is not growing. And the reason is that we don't have this connected to the switch yet, right? Which means it's always false. So now play it again. And now we should see that it's going to be expanding. There we go. Oh my god, it works. So we can make this a bit snappier by turning this to, for example, 76. There we go. And maybe even scale it up a bigger, 0.2. 0.15. There we go. So to make this look like an actual explode animation, what I'm going to do is after our delete geometry, I'm going to realize my instances. And then let's play this so we see some bubbles up here. There we go. And let's make it in the snap zone as well. There. There. And we can actually hit Shift A and scale elements here. We can scale our individual faces by, and we need to do that first, drag this to the right. We can actually Shift A, find a separate split edges. There we go. And then we can actually scale our elements individually, right? You can tell. So to do this, I'm going to use the same value, explode, Shift A named attribute, explode. And what I'm going to do is connect that to our scale. but I don't want to let that scale up, but I actually want this to make it scale down, right? So it's going from 1 to like 1.7 maybe. And what I'm going to do is Shift A and find a math node there. And I'm going to just subtract explode from a value of 2 maybe. Subtract. There we go. And let's just make this play and let's see how that looks. So there we go, there we go, there we go. And it's expanding, and at the same time, our faces are shrinking, as you can see. All right, and we can actually Shift A, find a math node. We can set this to multiply and set this to 2, so they shrink even more, I suppose. Right? There we go. You can see, and they're gone, just like that, quite easily. So let's also set our split edges to happen at that greater than zone of 75. So Shift A, named attribute, and we name this H, and then greater than 75 there. We can use that to control the selection here, right? So it doesn't split until they are 75 frames old. H compare, if this is false, it is going to be 0. It's not going to split any edges. If it is true, it's going to split all the edges. At least that is how it is theoretically supposed to work. So let's see. There we go. We get a nice popping animation, right? And even though it looks, well, it looks like we are getting faces that are expanding, I think we don't really notice that anymore when we are actually animating this with materials. But what we can do is hit Shift A and subdivision surface, I suppose, and just subdivide this one level, so all of those faces are going to look more rounded maybe. Perhaps that looks a bit better. And then we can also make this pop a bit more crazy, which means we can crank this up to 0.25 maybe. Now to fix whatever is happening, I'm going to set this to 1 again, and let's see what happens. Alright, so this is too quick. Set this back to 1. Yeah, that looks good, right? So if you want the values I have set now, we've got 0.25 for the explode, 76 here for the H, and then here we have 80. We've got our explode value. We multiply with 1. We don't need that. We can just delete that, and then we subtract that explode value from a value of 1, so it actually shrinks the faces down instead of scaling them up. And here we have 75, and then we are golden, right? So let's see how that looks here, right? Our bubbles are popping above the surface and they pop. Beautiful, right? So that is how you would do that, I guess. Alright, that has been part 3 of the potion tutorial series. Now we're almost there, but in the last part we'll add that final touch of magic and set it up for rendering as well. If you like this, please leave a like, a comment, subscribe. Any one of those will make me happy, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.